MSNBC's Ali Vitale is back with us. Also with us, Mark Leibovich, staff writer for The Atlantic and an MSNBC political contributor. Ali, you wrote a book on why America hasn't put a woman in the White House yet. When you hear Harris paint this picture of the tensions over her success, how Biden's staff handled it, does that tell us something about the political reality right now and potentially in 2028?
It could. I think the way that I looked at this excerpt first thing this morning was the ways that, yes, she talks about Biden. She talks about the recklessness of his running again. But central in her role was that she felt she couldn't say anything to the president about her desire for him not to run again, or maybe the thoughts that she thought he shouldn't, because of her ambition. I think that is just such a central thing that I continuously was seeing in this excerpt, which is frankly no holds barred. It's candid. It's authentic. And that's going to be important because as this specter of female ambition seemed to really haunt the entirety of Harris's time, both as vice president and also on the campaign trail. You and I talked in real time, Chris, back in the summer of 2020, before Harris had even been announced as Biden's running mate, that there was concern from top Biden allies about the fact that she had run for president before, just a few months prior, that she went hard at him on the debate stage, which is what you're supposed to do when you're competing in a primary, and that they worried about her ambition. The idea underlying that, frankly, was that people are always worried about vice presidents, but there seemed to be some greater degree of concern about Harris, almost as if to say that, like, women who are ambitious can't work as part of a team, can't subvert their own ambition to that of a president in this case. And one of the things that I wrote about in the book was how that continued to haunt her throughout. And you even see the way that she's writing about it here. It's important that she's saying it, but it's not just important from the perspective that Democrats might want to hear some candor around this from the woman who ran one of the most chaotic and unorthodox presidential races of our time, but it's also important to whatever her political future is, because studies show that usually voters don't dock or tax a female candidate who has run and lost before. I say usually because Harris's race for president was anything but usual, but what's going to be important is her establishing her candor and authenticity, and that means speaking directly and clearly to this moment. So this book shows us the way that she's trying to turn the page in her own next chapter, whether that's putting herself and her brand first or trying to parlay this into some kind of a future bid, whether that's 2028 or something else.
Mark, she also writes about Joe Biden, quote, and this is about so many people saying, why didn't somebody say something about Joe Biden? I knew it would come off to him as incredibly self-serving if I advised him not to run. He would see it as naked ambition, perhaps as poisonous disloyalty, even if my only message was, don't let the other guy win. It's Joe and Jill's decision, we all said, that like a mantra, as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. I wonder, Mark, how you think that passage will be received by many critics. Again, many of them Democratic voters, to be fair, who believe that too many people kept quiet, who may have known what was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack here. I mean, first of all, I read the excerpt. I will say, you know, I work for The Atlantic, so I guess my colleague Kamala Harris wrote this excerpt, right? I had low expectations. I expected this to be kind of very, very sort of dissatisfying, kind of very calculated and so forth. I thought it was much more candid than I expected. I haven't read the whole book, but certainly the excerpt, and again, I'm not just saying this for self-serving Atlantic reasons, it's very, I thought it was very compelling. Look, I think she is walking quite a tightrope here. I appreciated her candor. I also, when she said she couldn't speak at the time about him being too old as the vice president, given her position, you know, that rings 100% true. I mean, the nature of vice presidents is to prove 100% loyalty at all times. The nature of ambition, first of all, we need to have a moratorium on, you know, oh, this politician is just ambitious, whether it should be seen through a lens or not. I mean, these are politicians. These are politicians at the absolute highest level. Of course they're ambitious. You don't think Joe Biden was killed by ambition to try to, you know, win again at his age? I mean, that's part of this too. Ultimately, I thought it was a really compelling read. I don't know how she's going to pull this off going forward as she continues to talk about this, but I think it's sort of a first step of her salvo in trying to bridge a lot of contradictions that she lived through and that she's going to try to have to reconcile going forward. I think it was probably a pretty good first step.
So, Ellie, there was another part of this new excerpt that really struck me. She writes about the level of scrutiny, especially as the first woman, obviously, first black woman VP, about how she could be herself when she was, for example, with members of the Divine Nine sororities. But then she had to put on her usual armor when she left them, when she went back out into the real world. What does that say about the kind of scrutiny women face?
The kind of scrutiny, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just that there are so many other things that get talked about when it comes to women. She said, you know, like who I was dating in my 20s, then, frankly, men.
Yeah, and the fact that she writes in that excerpt that the White House wasn't really doing much to push back on stories like that either. I mean, look, this is what women face, not just women in politics, but women across the board, black women to an even greater degree. And I remember this both when I was covering the Biden-Harris campaign, the Biden-Harris White House, and then when I was writing my book, the way that there was a regular feeling within the vice president's orbit that the press corps didn't understand her, in large part because they were not always speaking to a diverse press corps that understood that there was a level of authenticity that women want in many cases to bring to the political table, but sometimes can't because they are damned if they do, damned if they don't. And frankly, when I was talking to someone for my book about why Harris had this overly cautious approach, because she did, and that was a lot of the reason for some of the criticism that she rightly got as a politician. Why wasn't she speaking out more on policy and other things? That is such a key piece of this. But that cautiousness, one person who worked for her had explained it to me as like she feels as if no matter what she does, she's going to get her hand slapped or there's going to be heavy criticism of it. And that's true for all politicians, but it is a different bar for women. And it's definitely a different bar for women of color. And I think that Harris was really the highest paradigm that we had ever seen tested of that. She talks in this piece, Chris, about how she was the first vice president with a truly dedicated press pool, reporters who would follow her in small numbers wherever she went. And in large part, that's because she was a first. She was novel in the role of being vice president. And one of the things that her team often felt was unfair was that there was this higher level of expectation for Harris to do more with the role of vice president, that she should change it somehow fundamentally simply because she looked different than everyone who had ever had the job. And it forces us to think about, well, were we ever thinking, well, where's Mike Pence on this random Tuesday? Why don't we hear more from Joe Biden as vice president? If you're doing a good job of being vice president, and Mark touched on this, you're not out in front. You're not making news. You're not carving your own brand. You are subsuming your ambition. And so that was always A, the central tension, but B, the thing that the Harris team was constantly butting up against. They wanted to be team players. They wanted to do the job of being a vice president, but every time they did that, there were critics saying, wow, she's just disappointing. And look, some of the criticism of her was fair. Politically, there were issues that she completely mishandled. But this is the other part of that unquantifiable piece of gender that I write about in my book.
Yeah, and you were working for a president who had gone through 2 terms of understanding exactly what's that like. So, Mark, look, the three of us are all people whose bookcases are probably filled with various political books, memoirs. So when I was told at 5 o'clock this morning, Atlanta got the excerpt of Kamala Harris, I'm like, yeah, well, what's in it? I agree with both of you. I mean, I was surprised by it, and it's compelling. She comes off as a tough, straight shooter. But is that how people will read it, do you think, Mark? Or is she burning some bridges here? Where do you put that?
I think it's pretty delicate. Look, in some ways, this book is kind of a microcosmic version of her presidential campaign, and that her presidential campaign, look, she did her best. I think she ran a decent campaign. She was in an impossible situation for a lot of reasons. She might not have won anyway, given the political landscape of 2024. And I think she'll be punished for that. And she'll be punished for what is seen as the sins of the Biden administration, whether it's fair or not fair. I do think that the reaction to this will probably be subsumed by a lot of backbiting from the Biden loyalists necessarily. I mean, I think the Andrew Bates thing is it's sort of like an initial like statement. It didn't really say anything. I think, look, there's going to be people certainly within Biden world who accuse her of disloyalty. They're going to be rolling their eyes. They might come back with other stuff. So it could get a little bit ugly. But look, I think as for what she was trying to do, I appreciate it. Or, I think she was as candid as she probably could get, given the framework of what she lived through, and also given the medium of writing a memoir when you actually might have a political career that you want to have in front of you. So, look, I don't know, but I do think that there'll be a lot of fallout from this, and it will probably subsume a lot of the coverage in the next few days.
We've got 30 seconds, so let me ask you, Ali Vitale. Again, we only read this small excerpt, but does it sound like someone who will run for president again?
Maybe. I think the biggest thing I'm going to be watching on the book tour is, does she turn the page? She had to contend with this issue of Biden. What did she think? Should he have run? All of it. If she had done it in the way that she was staying mum, no daylight kid, as our colleagues John Allen report in his book, then people would have criticized that. This is her authenticity. This is her candor. And I think that that's what we're seeing. If that's what's in the book, she's got to establish her own brand again before she has any political future. Maybe that's what we're watching. Time will tell.